Alright, today we're skipping the lengthy intro and jumping straight into the painting tutorial for the Graveyard Dragon. I'm using my favorite speed painting method for this paint up, so that's what I'll spend a little time discussing as we proceed. I begin by priming the entire miniature with midnight blue paint and primer in 1, which will serve as the deep shadow color for the entire miniature. Since this paint has a satin finish, I like to follow it up with a quick spray of matte varnish. I apply the varnish within a few minutes of spraying the midnight blue layer. This will help the subsequent acrylic paint layers better adhere to the model. I don't want to spend too much time explaining the speed painting technique used here, but I want to touch on a few key aspects that seem to cause some confusion. First, this isn't about physically painting faster. It's not a single technique like slap chop that requires you to paint the entire model in a specific way. I like variety in my hobby, so I'm always exploring different styles of painting. The key to this method of speed painting is reducing the amount of the model that I need to spend time painting in my chosen style. In other words, I'm cheating by quickly painting about half of the miniature as if it's in extreme shadow with a simple moonlight glow. This makes use of the primer color that is already in place. This blue glow can be created using slap chop by dry brushing the backside of the mini with white, followed by a coat of Beowulf Blue speed paint. Today I'm establishing the glow with azure through an airbrush. And this is where the confusion usually comes in. People see me using an airbrush and think the airbrush is part of the speed painting method. It's not. I've used this same trick with miniatures that are fully slap chopped, top to bottom, front and back. I've also used it with miniatures that I've meticulously painted by layering colors endlessly one on top of the other. This speed painting method is style agnostic. Time is saved because I'm essentially only painting half of the miniature. That's the greatest strength of this method. In my opinion, it's compatible with any style of miniature painting. I'm free to explore new and interesting painting styles while still saving time. I also fully appreciate that this look is polarizing, and the final appearance isn't for everyone. That's fine. There is still value to this Graveyard Dragon tutorial even if you hate the blue light glow on the back. The main focus of this tutorial, as with all of my tutorials, will be on the fully painted side of the miniature. If you like the way the fully painted side looks, then it's very easy to paint both sides of the miniature in the same way. I'll touch on this as we proceed. Alright, with the cheating part out of the way, let's get into the real meat of this project. After experiencing some confusion while painting the Convergence miniature for this game, not being sure what certain parts of the sculpt represented what, I decided to do a little research on this dragon first. In one of Awakened Realms project updates for Grim Coven, they shared this image of the Graveyard Dragon concept art. It conveniently lays out the full anatomy of the dragon, detailing what each feature of the creature is supposed to represent. I wish I had something like this on hand while painting Convergence. I'm using my airbrush to establish some base tones for the model. I'm sticking with mostly earth tones for this guy. I'm covering most of the miniature with dark brown. This is the darkest color for the brown areas, but it will also make a fine base for the oranges and olive greens on the other features. I'm spraying the paint at a slight angle from above. I never hit the model from the side at a 90-degree angle, but I come close. This isn't as dramatic as a zenithal highlight. I want only the subtlest amount of dark blue to remain visible in the deepest recesses. If you're not using the blue glow for your Graveyard Dragon, simply continue this process on the other side of the model as well. I follow the same process using olive green on the lizard skin. Now I'm more careful with my placement. I'm avoiding the attributes that I want to remain brown. I'm focusing this spray on the arms, legs, tail, and face. I initially placed this on the edges of the wings, but I changed my mind later and returned the wings to dark brown. So just avoid this part with the green. Now I make a white acrylic wash for the base of the glowing lament that is emanating from this grief-bound. I use titanium white acrylic ink mixed 50-50 with airbrush flow improver. The key is to have the whitewash thin enough that it easily flows into the recesses, but not so thin that it loses its opacity. Since this is an acrylic wash instead of an oil wash, there will be no removal step here. I'll have to come back with some darker acrylic paints to darken the areas that aren't supposed to be white. I'm also using this wash on the underside of the wing because I want it to look like the light is causing the translucent wing skin to glow as light passes through from the upper side. Darkening the raised surfaces of the model is easily achieved with a little dry brushing. And some detail work. Now I return to the airbrush one final time for the wings and the lament. I use burnt red for the top and bottom of the wings. The underside of the wing won't get highlighted to the same degree as the upper side of the wing, but the white underpainting will create a slight glow as if light is passing through the skin of the wing. I use crimson red acrylic ink through the airbrush for the glowing lament. Since the red lament is its own light source, I paint this on the shadow side of the Mini also. This is the only additional color that gets added to the blue side of the miniature. I like starting with a deep red and brightening it up with a standard brush later. Now it's back to titanium white ink and a standard brush to add some hot points to the lament. I also use this on the eyes to make them glow as well. I touch all of the hot spots with a little fluorescent red ink. I get to work on the wings with burnt orange pro acryl. This will be the initial highlight color for the upward facing side of the wing and the final highlight color for the underside of the wing. On the downward facing part of the wing, I want the recesses to be the brightest part of the wing to simulate light passing through the thinnest part of the wing skin. On the upper side of the wing, I'll highlight the raised surfaces in a traditional manner, since this part of the wing is affected directly by the ambient light. Throughout this painting, I occasionally add color to the base of the miniature when I have the appropriate color on my brush. I return to dark brown, again, to add a little contrast to the wing fingers. I also use this to cover some of the crimson red overspray on the features of the model that I want to appear brown. The final highlight for the top side of the wing is achieved with a mix of burnt orange and pale yellow. This is only applied to the upward facing folds and creases in the wing that would be hit directly by the light source. Next, I begin to highlight the brown elements that represent soil, vegetation, and shrubs. I'm using Vallejo orange brown for this initial highlight. To me, these bits look like dead twigs and branches, so I'm painting them accordingly. I plan to place a green moss effect in and around this decaying vegetation. There are so many tiny details on this model that I'm finding it easier to use a dry brush and paint them all as one unit, rather than attempting to paint each detail individually. I place a final highlight of yellow ochre using the same technique and medium-sized dry brush. I'm intentionally leaving these highlights somewhat subdued. I want the main focus, and therefore the brightest highlights, to be around the creature's face. continue with the dry brush for the Graveyard Dragon skin. I use it to dab army green on the prominent features and begin to shape the dragon's muscles. Even though this is a dry brush, I'm not dry brushing. I'm using this large brush to stipple the color into place. This is something that I just recently started trying out with these Grim Coven miniatures. I feel that this muddled appearance is more fitting for the grimdark theme of the game. I sometimes use one of my damaged synthetic round brushes to achieve the same effect as I did with the Tormentor. Before getting to the highlight color, I want to add some unexpected hues to the skin. My hope is that adding some pink around areas like the face, hands, knees, and elbows will help make the model appear more organic. Much of this will be covered by the highlights, but hopefully just enough shows through to have a subtle impact on the piece. I'm using a very light khaki green to highlight the lizard skin. I press on with the dry brush, dabbing and stippling this color over the high points of the beast's muscles and facial features. This is an easy way to make short work of larger miniatures. If I tried using my usual layering style on a miniature this big, it would take forever. I add a little yellow ochre to the underside of the dragon's tail to differentiate it from the rest of the skin on the piece. Finally, for the skin, I brush some muted violet ink into the recesses around the muscles and creases in the face. The mix of olive green, pink, and violet makes the flesh look more interesting than if I had stuck with a typical progression of green hues. I'm using fur brown to begin highlighting the dark brown on the wings. Then I add a little titanium white to the fur brown to dot in the ultimate brightness for the wing skin. I use Payne's Gray for the dragon's claws and spiky wingtips. I want these features to appear nearly black, but I generally don't like using pure black paint on my miniatures. Payne's Gray gets me close to that while still looking interesting. I then highlight the Payne's Gray with a lighter blue-gray color. We are rapidly approaching the end of this paint up. I just need to knock out a few more details before I add the fun little moss effect. I'm beating up the tombstones on the dragon and any stone items on the base with dark gray. I then use a medium gray to add some highlights. Normally, I would progress to a very light gray to highlight stone items such as these, but I want these features to remain unremarkable. I add a little yellow ochre to the ornamentation on the stone structures. I probably should have done this while I was painting the skin, but now is when I decide to add army green to the base. Once again, it is haphazardly dabbed into place. I use light brown airbrush paint to paint what I believe to be exposed rib bones in the Graveyard Dragon's blown open chest. I also use this over the army green on the base so it doesn't look so similar to the skin color. The final task for this project is using Dirty Down Moss to add green vegetation around the dead brown bits in the dragon's graveyard. Because I've had trouble using Dirty Down Rust before, I automatically begin by warming the Mini and the Dirty Down Moss in front of a space heater. I'm not sure if this is a critical step for using Dirty Down Moss like it is for the Rust, but I don't want to take any chances. This is probably my smoothest experience with a dirty down product yet. I simply brush a single layer of the moss in and around the creases found within the rough vegetation on the dragon's back. This dark liquid quickly bloomed into a vibrant, natural-looking moss effect that contrasts nicely with the surrounding muted color palette. I'm not sure if lush green moss is thematically appropriate for a graveyard-embodied grief-bound creature, but I am happy with the final appearance of this project. I'd like to thank my amazing channel members for supporting my efforts in making videos like this. You too can become a channel member for as little as $1.99 per month using the link in the description below. Thank you so much for watching. Please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel to join our growing community of... insert something clever here.